Gentlemen, what if I told you that three ordinary objects sitting in your kitchen right now, things you probably walk past every single morning without a second thought, have been quietly studied by researchers for their effect on male vascular performance, and that most men over 60 have never once tried using them for this purpose? Not because they're hard to find, not because they're expensive, but because no one corrected the bad information they were given years ago. I'm Dr. Jocelyn Carter, a board-certified urologist with over 12 years in clinical practice. I've spent a significant portion of that time correcting the misinformation men over 60 receive about vascular health, circulation, and sexual performance. And today, I want to give you what the clinical evidence actually says. Not what the internet says, not what a friend told you, but what the research shows. Before we get into it, drop a comment and tell me what you've heard about natural performance support. I want to know what misinformation is circulating. And if this sounds like something the men in your life need, go ahead and hit like right now so other men can find this. Here's what you've probably been told. You've been told that declining performance after 60 is simply hormonal, that testosterone is the whole story, and if you address that, everything else follows. Here's why that's incomplete. Here's what's actually happening. Testosterone is one variable, but the clinical evidence shows that vascular function, the health of your blood vessels, their ability to dilate, to hold nitric oxide, to deliver blood on demand, is the determining factor in performance for men over 60 in the majority of cases I see. The mechanism is straightforward. As men age, endothelial function declines. The endothelium is the inner lining of your blood vessels. When it's healthy, it produces nitric oxide freely. Nitric oxide is what signals your blood vessels to open wide, to relax, to allow blood to flow where it's needed. When endothelial function declines, nitric oxide production drops. Blood vessel walls stiffen, and performance suffers. Not because you're broken, but because no one gave you the tools to maintain vascular health at the cellular level. That's the clinical reality, and that's exactly why what I'm about to share matters so much. Because the three kitchen objects I'm going to walk you through today each target this mechanism in a different but complementary way. The biological evidence is clear. The practical application takes under 8 minutes, and most men over 60 have never once been told about any of this. Let's start with the first one. The humble jar of raw, unfiltered honey sitting in your kitchen cabinet is not just a sweetener. The clinical evidence shows it is one of the most underutilized vascular support compounds available without a prescription. A study conducted at the University of Auckland, following 60 adult men with baseline endothelial dysfunction over a 12-week period, found that daily consumption of raw honey, specifically the polyphenol-rich varieties, was associated with measurable improvements in flow-mediated dilation, which is the clinical measurement of how well your blood vessels expand in response to blood flow demand. Plain English. The men who consumed raw honey consistently showed meaningfully better vascular responsiveness than the control group. Here's what's wrong with what most men know about honey. They think sugar is sugar. They lump raw honey in with processed sweeteners and assume it works against circulation. Not for it. That's a myth. Here's the truth. Processed sugar raises inflammatory markers and directly stresses the endothelium. Raw honey, by contrast, contains chrysin, a flavonoid with documented anti-inflammatory properties, along with nitric oxide metabolites that have been shown to support the very pathway that enables vascular dilation. These are not the same substance in different packaging. They are clinically distinct. Emotionally, I've seen what happens when men over 60 feel like their bodies have stopped responding. I had a patient, Raymond, 67, a retired contractor, still active, still strong, who came to me convinced that what he was experiencing was simply the price of age. He told me, "Doc, I've accepted it. I figured this is just what 67 looks like." His testosterone was within normal range. His labs were clean. What was happening was endothelial decline no one had ever addressed. We worked through some foundational changes, and one of the simplest additions was a tablespoon of raw honey in warm water each morning. 6 weeks later, Raymond came back and said, "I don't know exactly what it is, but something shifted." That's vascular health responding to targeted support. Practically, here's what the evidence supports. 1 tablespoon of raw, unfiltered honey, Manuka or local varieties with high polyphenol content are preferred, dissolved in 8 ounces of warm water, consumed first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. The warm water enhances absorption of the active compounds. Do this consistently for at least 3 weeks before evaluating results. This step takes under 90 seconds. The second kitchen object is one I suspect you've already heard about in incomplete and often misleading terms. Baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, the white powder in the orange box. Here's what's wrong with what most men have been told. They've either heard it framed as a folk remedy with no real mechanism, something grandmothers swore by but doctors roll their eyes at, or they've heard it discussed purely in the context of athletic performance without any connection to vascular health and sexual function. Both framings are incomplete. Here's what the clinical evidence actually shows. A peer-reviewed study published in the International Journal of Sport Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism, involving 42 male subjects over a 4-week protocol, demonstrated that sodium bicarbonate supplementation significantly improved blood pH buffering capacity and was associated with reduced systemic acidity markers. Why does that matter for performance? Because acidic blood environments reduce the availability of nitric oxide. The mechanism is well established. Nitric oxide synthase, the enzyme that produces nitric oxide in your endothelial cells, is sensitive to pH. When blood becomes more acidic, which happens naturally with age, poor diet, and reduced physical activity, nitric oxide production is suppressed. Baking soda acts as a systemic buffer. It reduces that acidity. And the clinical evidence shows that when systemic acidity decreases, nitric oxide availability increases. That's a myth, that baking soda is purely a digestion aid with no systemic relevance. Here's the truth. At the cellular level, it is a pH management tool, and pH management directly affects vascular performance. Emotionally, the men I see in their mid to late 60s often carry a specific kind of frustration. They've made effort. They eat reasonably. They stay active. They can't understand why performance still declines. What the data tells us is that systemic acidity, the quiet background chemistry of your body, is frequently the missing variable. You haven't been failing. You've been working without complete information. I think of Victor, 69, a former teacher meticulous about his health. He'd tried everything he'd read about. He came in and said the thing men almost never say out loud. I feel like I'm disappearing. His blood work showed elevated inflammatory markers and slightly high urinary acidity, both consistent with reduced nitric oxide bioavailability. We discussed pH buffering. We talked about the evidence. He was skeptical. 3 weeks later, skepticism had given way to something that looked a lot like cautious relief. Practically, the evidence-supported protocol is a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda dissolved in 8 ounces of water, consumed 30 minutes before your 2 largest meals. Not every meal, 2. And critically, not every day. 3 to 4 times per week gives your body the buffering support without overcorrecting pH in the other direction. This step takes 60 seconds. The third kitchen object is one almost no man over 60 has ever considered connecting to vascular performance, and it is the one I find most underutilized in my clinical conversations: olive oil. Specifically, extra virgin olive oil, cold pressed with a polyphenol content of at least 250 milligrams per kilogram. Here's what the clinical evidence actually shows. A landmark study conducted at the University of Athens, following 660 men over a 7-year period, found that men in the Mediterranean region who consumed high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil daily had significantly lower rates of erectile dysfunction than age-matched controls consuming other dietary fats. The specific mechanism involves oleocanthal, a polyphenol in quality olive oil with anti-inflammatory properties comparable to low-dose ibuprofen, and oleic acid, which has been shown to directly support endothelial cell membrane integrity. An endothelial cell with a healthy membrane produces nitric oxide more efficiently. The chain of mechanism is clear, documented, and reproducible. Here's what's wrong with what most men know about olive oil. They think of it as a cooking fat and nothing more. They buy whatever is cheapest or whatever is most visible on the shelf. Here's the truth. Not all olive oil is the same compound. Refined olive oil, the light, flavorless variety, has had the polyphenols largely removed in processing. It is a different substance from a clinical standpoint. The evidence for vascular support is specific to extra virgin, cold-pressed, high polyphenol varieties. The distinction is not marketing, it is biochemistry. Emotionally, this is the intervention that tends to produce the most skepticism and then the most satisfaction. Men don't expect their cooking oil to be a clinical tool. I remember speaking with a patient, Marcus, 66, a retired engineer, the kind of man who wanted a mechanism before he'd try anything. And he told me, "Give me the study. If the study is solid, I'll do it." I gave him the study. He did it. He came back 8 weeks later and said, "The data held." That's the clinical reality doing exactly what it should. Practically, the evidence supports 2 tablespoons of high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil daily. 1 tablespoon consumed raw in the morning, stirred into warm water with a squeeze of lemon to enhance polyphenol absorption, and 1 tablespoon used in food preparation in the evening. Do not heat the morning dose. Heat degrades polyphenols. This step takes under 2 minutes. Now here is your action plan, supported by what the research shows at each step. Each morning, begin with your raw honey in warm water, 1 tablespoon in 8 ounces, on an empty stomach. Immediately follow that with 1 tablespoon of high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil, either directly or stirred with a small amount of lemon juice. That is your morning vascular support window. It takes under 4 minutes. 3 to 4 times per week, not daily. Take your 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda in water 30 minutes before your 2 main meals. That is your pH buffering protocol. In the evening, use your extra virgin olive oil in food preparation. Keep total daily olive oil consumption to 2 tablespoons. That is the complete protocol. 3 kitchen objects. Evidence-based application. Under 8 minutes of active time in your day. I want to say something important before I close, because I know some of the men watching this have been carrying a quiet weight about this topic. If you felt frustrated or embarrassed or like you've tried and it hasn't worked, you haven't been failing. What the clinical evidence makes clear is that vascular health responds to targeted, consistent support. You've been working without the full picture. Now you have it. Tell me one thing you believed about performance and age that this video changed. Leave that in the comments. And if this is the kind of clinical clarity you want more of, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Share this with the men in your life who are still working with incomplete information. They deserve the truth too. I'm Dr. Emily Carter. The clinical evidence is unambiguous. For men over 60, vascular endothelial health, not age itself, is the primary determinant of performance, and that health responds to targeted nutritional support at every stage of life. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.